best when it brings people together and when it brings better outcomes to those who need them most. That quote couldn't be more fitting for the conversation we're about to have. Today, we're looking at how artificial intelligence is redefining leadership, ownership, and bold decision-making inside the enterprise. Not in some distant future, but right now. I'm your host, Ken Umansky, and on this episode of Technology, we're talking with a leader who has helped scale and transform some of the world's most complex businesses, from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, from stock exchanges to digital-first startups. Chris Corrado is the CEO of the Americas for Squirro, an enterprise-grade AI insights platform helping organizations turn unstructured data into actionable intelligence. Prior to Squirro, Chris was CIO of CardWorks and CEO of SiteHands, the world's first IT field service marketplace. He also held CXO roles at Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank, Merrill Lynch, UBS, and served as COO of the London Stock Exchange Group. His experience spans e-commerce, telecom, and advisory work with firms like Crypto.com. Chris, I'm honored to have you today. Welcome to Technology, and I'm thrilled to have you with us to discuss this important topic. So let's dive right into the deep end, if you wouldn't mind.
Sounds great. And thanks for that wonderful introduction, Ken.
No problem. I think your background is stellar, and I think my audience will see that as we go through this session. As agentic AI takes over optimizing processes and low-risk decision-making, it's easier to ask permission from a machine. Where does that leave the human need for risk and bold action? In a world of algorithmic safety, how does someone still lead with courage?
Yeah, the world is really changing with respect to the roles that you emphasize and the roles that you de-emphasize. So we're really moving from people who want to believe that focusing on execution is the way to go in terms of managing what they do and their career versus orchestration. So imagine a world where many of the workers are now digital workers, whereas before there were people sitting around in your office. And how do you make sure that you're monitoring what's going on with those digital workers, but not trying to do everything that they're trying to do, because the whole purpose of AI is to leverage these digital workers. So you become more of what I'll call a conductor versus a musician, because we're in effect automating what musicians do. So where you end up doing is you end up focusing on ethics. You're focusing on the degree of risk. You focus on things like the guardrails that you'd implement in the system to make sure things don't go awry, whereas people used to make those decisions in the past.
So here's a situation. I was in business, as we talked about, in New York for a long time. And one of the things that was really helpful is when we came up with an idea, it was an iterative process. It was starting with, the germ of an idea, but everybody adding on to it, et cetera. Do you think that's still going to happen with, with algorithms and machines taking over?
Absolutely. And in fact, this has been going on for quite some time. The big difference is non-deterministic results versus deterministic results, and the fact that you have to decide, where do you want the human in the loop now? So you could go with a fully automated situation where you're right, like the digital workers are iterating everything on your behalf, but you could decide, when do you want to get involved? You might want to get involved based upon the guardrails, for example, that you put in place. Like if you get answers beyond a set of constraints, you want to stop, you want the system to stop and ask, now what do I do? Here's what I'm facing right now. So that's going to be the tricky balance. Where do you put the human in the loop to make sure that, in fact, you're actually adding value, but you're keeping the process moving along?
Yeah, so the companies that I've talked to who are using AI now basically are using it to help with efficiency. It's all about saving time and therefore saving money. And on the repetitive side of things, the repetitive tasks are what they're using it for. How do you see that expanding, and how do you see that evolving from the standpoint where human interaction becomes more important?
Yeah, I think, of course, companies have been focused on efficiency for a long time and automating things. The big difference is now is you can deploy your unstructured data to help do that. Whereas that was very difficult in the past. You really couldn't do it. The algorithms didn't exist. The technology didn't exist to enable that. So now by putting the unstructured data to use, you can gain more efficiency. But actually, what's more important, frankly, is you can actually make better decisions. Like, so you can imagine digital workers using some of these algorithms and platforms, accessing unstructured data can do things that were pretty much impossible in any given time frame in the past. So that's what you really have to figure out how to do that, how to leverage that unstructured data to make better decisions in addition to just purely generating efficiency. And I think that's the move that companies need to become comfortable with to fully take advantage of what AI has to offer.
Okay. All right. Well, if AI agents can now handle any task regardless of the job title, what does true ownership mean for human professionals? When do you actually have skin in the game with the machines executing the work and doing some thinking along the way?
It's all about owning the outcome. So you're accountable for the outcome. Frankly, it's similar to when you would hire various vendors to do things for you in the past, for example, in the technology area. So just because you didn't build it, you bought it, or you bought it and you're integrating it, that doesn't mean you're not accountable anymore. So you're still accountable. So what can you put in place to make sure that that accountability is honored in a way that you feel comfortable with the outcomes that you're getting? The other aspect of this is the whole issue of ethics and auditability. You have to feel comfortable that the answers that you're getting are ethical and the answers that you're getting are auditable. Because once again, you're accountable for all that. The machines aren't going to be accountable. There's still humans that have to say, I think it's good enough, or I think it's correct. So you have to be thinking about what do you implement as part of the system because people are involved to make sure that's the case.
So, talk a little bit more about ethics when it comes to a machine. Um, how do you define or how are you going to audit ethics, and how are you going to implement that? Is that in the algorithm, or where does that come into play?
Yeah, I mean, that's really my point. It's not in the algorithm today. That doesn't mean it won't be down the road at some point. The typical AI implementations today can't provide uh, a view on ethics at the moment. They're just not programmed, if you will, to do that today. That again, that may change in the future. Ethics might be, for example, if to generate a certain level of efficiency, there's a certain amount of people that have to be relocated, terminated, uh, or even demoted in some cases, right? Because that certain positions aren't available anymore. And is that what you want to do as part of your company, right? Do you want to have a company like that or not? The other aspect is abiding by regulatory obligations. Most people think that's black and white, but often it isn't as black and white as you otherwise might think, because these things are interpreted in some way. Like a regulation can be interpreted as opposed to it's either yes or no. So you have to abide by that as well. So that again, the human being has to be involved in doing things like that today, unless a machine can be trained to act the way you would act in some ethical way. And that also is defined by culture as well. And we know what that's like around the world. Cultures are different and they define ethics in different ways. So your answer, your outcome has to be defined in that context as well, which also is a bit of a challenge and involves human beings as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how it all evolves. In the future, when we say work only with the best, does that mean curating the right humans or curating the right AI agents and proprietary LLMs? How does trust in a human teammate translate to trust in a digital one, or does it?
Let's start with trust for a minute. Trust to me is all about transparency,
Mhm.
uh, so that you provide the visibility into what the system is doing to generate the outcomes that it's generating. So when the answer is, 32, if you will, how did you get that answer? So what's the traceability associated with that? And does it make sense? You have to be able to provide that. So the system has to be instrumented in such a way that you can actually provide that information. Then it has to be monitored, and then there has to be alerts associated with that. So you can feel like at any one point in time, you can stop the system if you had to, or direct it in a different way because
Mhm.
you've got this level of instrumentation and transparency in the system. The other thing that you'll see external bodies that actually certify systems in a way that auditors certify financial statements today. That's going to become a very big field, I think, down the road. And it's going to be required by regulators as well, some level of certification. And frankly, this has been going on for some time with model validation. When
Mhm.
models are produced, for example, to assess credit worthiness, those models have to be auditable for obvious reasons, right? So that there's not discrimination involved in whether a credit application is approved or denied. So that's where trust really comes in. And I think more and more companies are going to be demanding that the platform, the application you're provided can be trusted. And again, that implies often auditability, human in the loop to an extent as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never really thought about trusting a machine from the standpoint of, you know, how I trusted it from an accuracy standpoint, but from an ethics standpoint or a moral standpoint, I've never really thought about that. Hmm.
Right. And working with the best, to get back to the other part of your question, is you want to give people the choice of the LLMs that they want to use. For
Mhm.
example, the platform that my company produces today gives you that choice. We're not in the LLM business per se. So today it's probably cumbersome for most companies to actually implement something like that. However, that'll change in the future. You can imagine a situation where you want to get an answer and you want to be able to, on a real-time basis, point it to the LLM that will give you the best answer based upon the history of what that LLM has been doing,
Mhm.
potentially in your industry or other industries for that matter. So the best is, what's the best algorithm? What's the best LLM, for what I can do. So knowing that those options need to exist is what's going to be important. So you again want to work with people that again are orchestrators of AI platforms that can direct those platforms that utilize the best possible technology at a price. There's always a price point of affordability that you have to think about as well.
Yeah, future's going to be really interesting, isn't it? In the past, entrepreneurs were told to work underground as long as you can to avoid internal resistance. But now, if the blockers are embedded in the AI itself, in the rule sets and models, how you're going to change agents, how are change agents going to break through?
Yeah, the change agents are going to be uh, in potentially dual part, right? So there's the human that wants to modify the system in such a way that it provides a more advanced outcome. It could be a faster result, it could be a cheaper result. So you're constantly tuning the system like you would have tuned a system in the past, taking risk, right? That risk, again, you have to have the transparency associated with that. So you have a sense for what that risk might be and whether it's worth it or not, all based on risk return. So because you could break the system on behalf of people. So the change rate in this business can be quite high with all this money that's being invested in AI today. So you've got to determine again, how much risk are you willing to take based upon taking advantage of the available technologies that exist?
Yeah. Okay. Here's one that I think is really interesting. If someone sponsors your AI-driven success, a department head, an executive champion, someone who's mentoring you, what's the best way to repay that political favor? Is it sharing the credit, as usually happens today, or is it transferring the successful proprietary model itself? What's the modern currency of loyalty in an AI-enabled enterprise?
Yeah, I think it ends up being a bit of both. You want to praise the person that made a bet on you, right?
Yeah,
Uh, in the spirit of nobody's perfect, um, people forget about that from time to time because maybe it could be your boss, it could be a colleague. They made a mistake and somehow it's upset you. But always, I've always tried to deal with that myself in the past. People who make bets on you, especially knowing that they're making bets on imperfect people, you have to honor them because they're your promoter in essence. And then I can think about that on the system side as well. I can tell you a number of occasions making recommendations of technology platforms to other colleagues, right? Because I think that platform has done a great job for me in the past. Having said that, it's often not just about the technology, but it's what you do with it, how you configure it, how you run it, right? The types of dependencies that can be very different from company to company. So just because it worked in one environment, that doesn't mean it'll work in all environments.
right.
One has to be careful about that as well.
Well, as your company continues to help enterprises turn data into meaningful action, your insights today remind us that the future of leadership is not just less human, it's more intentional, more ethical, and more intelligence. Um, we've run out of time as 15, 20 minutes really goes fast pretty quickly. Um, I really want to thank you for everything that we talked about today. I think there's some insights there that I've never thought about. I'm sure my audience hasn't thought about it in terms of, the moral and ethical dilemmas that are going to face us as we get more into AI and machine learning. I think it's really going to be an interesting world. Thank you for your time. And just like Squirro is helping businesses understand the data beneath their decisions, Performix builds AI agents that help them act on it, streamlining operations, reducing waste, and scaling what works. Performix 2025 mission is AI for every business, which means delivering solutions that are accessible, affordable, and deeply effective. If you're ready to explore how AI agents can amplify your team's potential, visit performixbiz.com. That's performixbiz, B-I-Z.com. Thanks for joining us on technology today. And until next time, stay smart, stay curious, and keep innovating.